Good afternoon, Amador County. This is Supervisor John Plasse of District 1 here to give the Board of Supervisors report, advance report, if you will, for tomorrow, the 25th board meeting at Amador County Board of Supervisors. The first item on our agenda is the county's civil grand jury's report to the Board of Supervisors, but I'm going to save that for the second half of our show here today. With us, we'll have Paul Molinelli Jr. at that time as one of this year's outgoing grand jurors, and here to give you a good explanation of how the whole grand jury process works. So with that said, I'll move on to the second item on our regular agenda, and that is a proposal to adopt a resolution opposing the proposed listing of and designation of critical habitat for the yellow-legged frog and Yosemite toad. The reason this has come to the board's attention, we always get notices from the Fish and Wildlife Service anytime an endangered species is being considered to be listed as an endangered species. I guess maybe they move from threatened to endangered. But in this instance, it really dovetails in with a project that the board has been working with the U.S. Forest Service on for some time now. That is the travel management plan. Some of you may recall that the Forest Service adopted a travel management plan which actually designated certain routes and trails as accessible for motorized vehicles, whether they be ATVs or Jeeps for some of the Jeep clubs or any number of items. That proposed listing or designation of those routes was challenged a second time in court by some environmental activists out of the Forest Hill area and the Center for Biological Diversity, claiming that the Forest Service had done a whole host of things wrong. I believe they levied somewhere in the area of 60 to 80 complaints. They prevailed on one complaint which showed that the Forest Service had not adhered to their Standard and Guidelines 100, which is an internal Forest Service rule saying that they need to study the effects on hydrology and the connectivity of hydrology in meadow areas. So this lawsuit challenged a total of 42 designated routes for vehicular access, motorized vehicle use, as not having complied with that Standard and Guidelines 100. The Forest Service went about an analysis of those 42 routes after the judge's order required that they do so. And in their analysis, they came to realize that out of the 42 routes, only 18 were actually being affected, or meadows, only 18 meadows were actually being affected by or had some effect by the trails existing in those areas. So the Forest Service closed down those 18 routes and reopened the other 24 while they had the opportunity to further study these impacts. Well, we were at a point in discussing all this and the public comment period with the Forest Service right up until the day our most recent forest supervisor, a lady named Kathy Hardy out of the Placerville office, was set to retire. And on the day of her retirement, she ruled that the 18 routes that were closed could not be reopened until the Forest Service goes through a full biological study and mitigation measure and project completion basis before there's any chance that those routes remain opened. It's a great concern to both the Amador County Board of Supervisors as well the Alpine County Board of Supervisors, because a significant portion of our recreation in our forested lands, public land areas, for both counties is derived from motor vehicle access to these forest areas and back into some of these remote areas where people like to recreate, either just to access high mountain lakes for fishing or to just enjoy their travel routes and see some scenery that they otherwise wouldn't be able to see. This listing of the yellow-legged frog has further complicated that by being tied with the Forest Service's decision to not reopen those routes, even though the frog is not listed yet on the Endangered Species Act. The Forest Service studied for it some 12 months ago before it was even proposed to be listed, and has used that as part of their decision to close these routes. So the Board of Supervisors has a resolution prepared that talks about how many of these travel routes are historic routes. Many were traveled by wagon trains and vast quantities of livestock and oxen and mules and everything else that came across these travel routes historically. And now, because somebody has an axe to grind with someone using a motorized vehicle, they're finding legal ways or quasi-legal ways to affect the closure of these routes to the motorized public. Again, severely affects our recreational opportunities in the high country, and as it does alpine counties as well. Alpine has also opposed this legislation. So we've got a resolution on our board meeting tomorrow that will address that and see if we can have some impact on that decision. The second item on our agenda is a selection of an alternative to apply for an HSIP grant, which is the Highway Safety Improvement Program funding source. This is an application that is proposed to be submitted by the City of Plymouth in conjunction with Amador County, because the improvement project at Shenandoah Roads and Fiddletown Roads falls within the county purview. So we will be studying two remaining alternatives on that and deciding whether we want to request that the City of Plymouth go forward with that grant application, either on a very minor build project, just some minor modifications to the existing intersection, or if we go for a more robust traffic improvement program there. It will either be decided to go forward with the City of Plymouth, or potentially the county might wait until we're able to apply for that grant ourselves, which should be next year, and handle that road improvement project internally within the county. The Board of Supervisors has also been asked to support, and I will say I am very willing to do so. I can't speak for the board entirely. A letter that was drafted by your Amador County Sheriff Martin Ryan to the Governor of California, Mr. Brown, on opposition to some of the host of gun legislation bills proposed to come out of the California State Legislature. Sheriff Ryan points out that the bulk of these bills are more of an emotional reaction to some of the more recent mass murder situations that have occurred around the country, rather than an actual factual response, I guess you would say, to the conditions that exist. Sheriff Ryan points out that although all classifications of rifles that have been used in the commission of homicides only accounts to 2.5% of the homicides in the state of California, many of these regulations go after hunting rifles and other rifles that are actually family heirlooms that have been handed down. They call out the ability to detach a magazine of ammunition from the rifle as indicative of that rifle being an assault rifle, and nothing could be farther from the truth. There's many old historic rifles. I'm sure you all know many people, as do I, that own rifles of such makeup. And they're no more an assault weapon than the BB gun that your child may have learned to shoot with. But they've been called out in some of this legislation, so Sheriff Ryan has drafted a letter, and the board looks to support that letter, trying to point out to the California legislature that with 2.5% of all homicides being related to rifles, knives actually account for almost 15% of homicides, blunt objects for 4.9%, and hands and feet as 5.6% of all homicides created in California. This legislation is going after rifles that really fall under the category of hunting rifles. So we will look to sign on to Sheriff Ryan's letter in support of that. We also have an Assembly constitutional amendment coming up that largely revolves around California's longstanding legislation that requires a 2/3 vote of the public to pass any tax increases and or major bond indebtedness that will be covered with additional interest payments from the various jurisdictions that incur that indebtedness. For years, it's been a requirement that 2/3 is required. This legislation, and this is Constitutional Amendment number 8, being brought forward by Assembly members Chesbro, Nazarian, Jones, Sawyer, Rendon, and Williams, proposes to lower that limit to 51% rather than the 2/3%, and could do everything from increase your property taxes or ad valorem tax rates to also incur greater bond indebtedness for a host of different measures, from everything from schools on down to water systems, wastewater systems, storm drain systems, and park and recreational facilities. So if you have a concern that a vote of the people should be greater than a simple majority to incur those levels of indebtedness to your tax dollars, please weigh in on Constitutional Amendment number 8. This would be something that, again, the board is discussing to take a position on. In the second half of my report, I'll be again joining Grand Juror Paul Molinelli Jr., and we will discuss the grand jury's report to the Board of Supervisors and how that whole process works. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're watching Amador County's local television network, TSPN.